Hey, I'm Michael Dorinda,
And I'm Jake Bennett.
and welcome to episode 192 of the North Meets South web podcast.
All right, Michael. Last time we were on the air, I spent most of the time talking. And so it is now your turn to bring to the table all the amazing goodness that you are working on or all the problems that you have. And if we have time at the end, maybe I can throw something in there. But today is your show, my friend. Well, actually, you know what? It wasn't actually me. Well, I suppose it was me sort of talking a lot of the time. It was David Hemphill was on, right? Time before
Was.
that, though, it was almost all me talking. So anyway, yeah, how are things going for you, dude? What's going on with work at your place?
It's good. Work's been busy doing lots of different things. Just building new APIs because we purged, we destroyed, we deleted
Ah,
off the face of the earth the old JSON API a few months ago, and
really?
now,
Okay. What's the reasoning
yeah.
for
Well,
that? What was is this
I
an
mean the
internal
main
API that only you guys use?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, okay.
I mean, when it was built, the idea was that everything would be exposed over a public API that we would be the primary consumer of with our front end, with our Vue SPA on the front end. But then
Okay.
we would have people that would consume that API for
Ah,
their own purposes as well.
okay. Did you
But because it
advertise
was
it? Was it made was did you have like public documentation or was it just people
Yeah,
figured
there
it
was
out or
public
what?
documentation for it. Yeah, we had docs for it, but the kinds of customers that we had were not really of a size or scale because they're brokers, right? Asset finance brokers or mortgage brokers. They're not really companies that have in-house dev teams and people that are
Not
going to be
super
building
technical?
these
Yeah.
integrations and things like that. And so there was opportunity to use things like Zapier to push from like their CRMs via Zapier into our APIs and things like that, but it just never really eventuated. And as we started to rebuild our platform, it became more and more clear that the benefit of using our platform was not in the API that was never used anyway. It was more from
Yeah.
the logic and the business rules and everything that tied it all together. You could create a person resource or a business resource or a whatever, but it was the rules around what that meant and how they came together, and the roles that you would assign to people and their relation to the application that are attached to and things like that. And that core business logic lived in our application. It lived in the front end. It was not. And so over time, I said 3 years ago, 4 years ago, we don't need this API. No, like who is the audience for this? And it was
Yeah.
always a case of like someone build it and they will come, and that never
Mhm.
eventuated. But
Yeah.
we got rid of that a few months ago now, and it's gotten to the point where okay, now we can look at what we do actually need to expose. And as we've grown over the last few years, and we're working with larger businesses, and they've got more capability on their side to integrate. What do we actually need to provide them, and where do we draw the line around? They're just sending us lead data, and then they're coming in and they're using our platform to fill that in. They're building out, um, you know, org chart is probably the most simplistic way of doing it, but it's like company structures. So, a company that has a director, that has shareholders, whatever, all this stuff that we can kind of map out. And so, use the platform to do that kind of stuff rather than um, API. So we've kind of now, with the experience of knowing who those consumers are and what they actually want to do and be able to do, we can now build that kind of functionality out. So that's where we are now in terms of building all that functionality out. So that's what I've been working on. Using Passport and doing some interesting things, I think, that are kind of just the way that our users need to be able to interact with the platform. So we don't really have the notion of a request user. Like, a user is not making a request. It is a
Okay.
it is a Passport client that is making a request, and that client has access to one or more groups, and then it has access to one or more users in each of those groups. So it's kind of like the client is then granted access to one or more groups, And groups like
Do you
just
have a
group like
model for
businesses.
client?
We've got it's just the passport model. And then so we've introduced another one
What?
that is like a
Yeah.
pivot table that says like this
Well, wait,
client has
sorry. So
access
like
to
client is the passport model, or client is just a model that represents like who is the client in your domain, like in the plain
so
terms,
yeah,
who's the
passport. It's a
client?
passport client. Yeah.
Oh, it's just like passport client is the name of it.
Yeah. So we're talking about like we
Gotcha. So
go
you
and
just
create a passport client.
yeah, and then that passport client just has like tokens, like it has
Yep.
personal access tokens
Yeah.
because
So it's got a
passport. That's kind of
client
how that
ID and
works.
secret. Yeah. So passport manages all
Yep.
of that side of things. We don't allow our customers to create their own clients. We will create them for them, and then we'll give them the ID and secret, the credentials, and then we will link up. Okay, this passport client belongs to this group of users, and so you have access to one or more groups, and then you will have access to all of the users and all of the resources within those groups, kind of thing.
Can
So
you I don't want to interrupt with that, but I am curious if we could loop back to that at some point. Like passport versus Sanctum. Like if there was
Mhm.
you guys had discussions around that, or any interesting like caveats or trade-offs between those two solutions. Um
um, mostly just because passport was already in the platform, like we were already using it for things. I think we are using Sanctum for our first party functionality.
yeah, that would make sense.
Yeah. So all of our first party SPA is um, built on top of Sanctum, but all of the API stuff is Passport, which I think that is the delineation. The Passport is
Okay.
for more external stuff, and Sanctum is more for your first party applications. I mean, I
Interesting.
could be
I
wrong, but
didn't know
that's
that that was a delineation. Yeah, I mean I think there is like a passport or Sanctum. Before getting started, you wish me to determine if you would be better served by passport or Sanctum. If your application absolutely needs to support OAuth 2, you should use Laravel Passport. However, if you're attempting to authenticate a single page app, mobile application, or issue API tokens, you should use Laravel Sanctum.
Mm.
Laravel
And I
Sanctum
think we've
does
got
not
like
support
this.
OAuth 2, but it's a much simpler API authentication development experience,
Mhm.
which has been my experience. OAuth 2 is just, I don't know, there's a lot of stuff that integrates it with it now, like, to the point you're making, like, you know, Zapier, all those things. They have full OAuth 2 support, so it's not like a big lift on their side. You know what I mean? It's probably
Right.
very familiar to some of those things. Whereas like Sanctum, it's just like you have to go and you have to issue an API token and all that good stuff. So,
Mhm.
um, yeah, I hate it. I hate OAuth too. I mean, that's a little bit of
Yeah.
a strong language, right? Sort of thing. It's always been a pain in the neck for me when I have to set up a new application that has to authenticate with OAuth 2 versus using Sanctum. Because Sanctum, you just you grab a single API token and it's good for forever, right? For as long as you
Right.
need it.
Yep.
Whereas with
Yep.
OAuth 2, it's like it expires, you have to issue a refresh token, and then the refresh
Right.
token has to be used to fetch a new token, and then you get a new refresh token, all that stuff.
Mm.
Yeah, so I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah. So yeah, because the client will have access to resources based on that pivot table, um, it means that we don't have like the authenticated user is not being as attached to these things. The authenticated user has
Yeah,
access
that makes
to
sense.
groups and
Mm-hmm.
users. And so we require that you pass these via headers. So you pass the group ID as a header, you would pass the user ID as a header, and then as part of the request authorization, we go and check, hey, do you have these fields? Does this request require both a group and a user, or is it a group only thing? Um, and then based on the request, which we set on the form request object, which we use for all of our validation authorization stuff, it will then figure out, do I need one or both? It will then go and look up that user, and it will set that as the user on the API guard, so
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
we can use request user throughout the process and
Yeah.
things like that. Um, Interesting side bit to that, we have this macro defined on the request class called authenticated user, and that mostly exists to satisfy stan, like static analysis,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because the um the request user will doesn't actually return a user, returns an implementation of authenticatable, but it can also
Yeah.
return null. And so you find yourself, depending on what level of Laristan, PHP stan you're using, you've got to go and, assign a variable and then attach a doc block, a
Which
comment
is
to it
null
that
safe
says that like
operators
this is a
everywhere
user. Yeah.
downstream.
Yep.
Yeah.
So we've just created a request macro that basically the request macro says authenticated, the method authenticated user will always return a user, because we know that by
Yeah.
the time we get to that point, we've already gone through the request, the auth middleware that says there's a user here. So we know that it's going to exist. We don't have to do those null checks everywhere and things like that. And
Nice.
whatever else. So that's been very handy. I did run into an issue today, actually, where we're using that authenticated user. And I've actually, don't worry about all of this work stuff. This is boring in the context of Laravel. And for our listeners, I think it's probably more useful to talk about like some of the interesting things that I've run into very recently, actually, is the way that Passport handles authentication and how it kind of fakes all of this stuff in CI or in your test environment. Okay. So when you use like Passport acting as or Passport acting as client, it does some munging of the request lifecycle, which can bite you.
Yeah, can I quick answer on that? So like when you're talking about that, you're saying like in your testing in your CI where you do Passport acting as, which is basically just a nice little helper function to say like, okay, in the case that you authenticated using Passport as this user, like assume that's the case, now start this request. And you can do the same with Sanctum, but they're just little helpers that are available for Passport. Mm-hmm. And so you're saying that's all doing fake stuff behind the scenes.
Right. Yeah. And it's not just like setting a user, it's going and scaffolding a whole bunch of stuff out. So if you say that this route is being accessed by this client, so like this OAuth client, it'll go and set some things up there. If you say it's using this user, it'll go and set a user on the guard. If you say that this route requires specific scopes, like if you need a users read or users.read or whatever, it will go and it will set the Passport resource server to have those things already in there. So we've run into issues in the past where I have forgotten to register the Passport token. So there's in a service provider, you put like passport.tokens can, and then you pass an array of tokens. Now I've forgotten to do that in the past, saying that, here's a users.read token. So all of your tests are passing. You put tests in there to make sure that like, hey, if I don't pass this scope, that this will fail. If I do pass the scope, it will let me through, and all of that.
Right.
All the tests are there and it's working. You get to production because you haven't actually registered the token. Best I can tell, and I'm not saying this with 100% certainty because I haven't looked into it too closely as yet, but the best I can tell, the only place that it checks that you've got a valid scope is on the token endpoint where you are actually requesting a token for a scope. So if I was to, and this is where we end up running into it, is when the consumer of the API then goes to, myapi.com/OAuth/token, says I want a client credentials grant type, here's my client ID, here's my secret, and I want this users.read scope. If I have not put that users.read scope into the tokens can method in a service provider somewhere, it will come back with an error saying that this is an invalid scope, and you can't do it. But none of that happens in your test because you're not doing that process. So we've now gone and dynamically registered all of these scopes, right? So we've put all of the scopes inside of an enum. And so
yes, exactly.
Now we just do like inside that method, we just do like ... scopes : cases, and then we'll just loop through it. For each of these, we'll map it and we'll return all of those values. So here's the value, and here's the description from that enum, and that we don't have to worry about it anymore, about forgetting to do that. Because, I went and wrote a test, and as I was writing this test that then returned all of the enums to make sure that we registered, I was like, well, actually, I don't need to write a test for this behavior. I can just use this same loop that I've written that, is testing that the enums have been registered to just register them. Yeah,
exactly.
And so like they all need to be registered. If they're in that scope enum, it's because we need them for, functionality. And so we put that in there. So it's a little gotcha that I've run into a couple of times now. And I thought, well, we're going to go and fix this in such a way that I don't run into it. And then, you don't, because how often are you adding scopes? You come back in 6 months and you go, okay, I added it to the docs and I added it here and I wrote the test for it and we're all good and we're in production. And then someone's like, well, it's not giving me this scope. I was like, oh yeah, I see. So,
yep. Yep, we had a similar situation with our permissions. So, um, yeah, we started using enums and using cases, and it is just the best because
Mm.
you had it in one spot and it just works everywhere. And so, yeah, that is a clutch move. I'm loving those enums. It's pretty great, pretty great.
So
That is
just looking at
interesting
this,
though.
like,
That's that all your tests would pass and everything, and then nope, production fails.
think you're doing
That
the right thing.
sucks.
But yeah,
Yeah.
acting as will create a new access token, and it will set
Mm-hmm.
the OAuth client ID, it will set the user ID, it will set the scopes, it will attach the access token to the user, and then it will go and set the user on the auth guard. It will set, and then it runs like auth should use on the guard, and it
Mm-hmm.
kind of just like munges all of that together.
Yep.
So
Yep.
it's like it's circumventing a bunch of stuff that you would actually do in production, where you would go and get a token and you would go through this registration process and things like that. Acting as client will mock a resource server, and it will go and set the scopes and the user ID and the client ID and all of this kind of stuff. So yeah, we ran into some like other weird issues where if you're using a client OAuth client that doesn't have a user attached to it, there's some like stuff happening behind the scenes in Passport that will take the client ID and attach it to the user ID, and then it will go and try and find that user using the like database provider from the database. Um, and in our staging environment, we've still got some like old data in there where we haven't changed all of the IDs over to snowflakes. So when we've got like client ID of 5 in the OAuth clients table, it then goes, oh, there's no user attached to this, so we'll set that to the user ID as well. Then it goes and tries to
Yikes.
find the user,
Oh boy.
and it does, select star from users where ID equals 5, and then it returns a completely different user, and things start to go wonky because that user doesn't have access to it. I'm like, well,
Yeah, that
this
seems
seems a
dangerous.
bit,
Yeah.
yeah. So we went to fix that up yesterday, but it's just like, and I had a rough idea of like how to fix it, but I sent Claude after it, and it was just watching
Yes.
Claude actually itself going in loops, going, I could do this, and the easiest fix would be this, and then he goes, but hang on, something, and it's just okay. Well, we'll anytime that you have to dive into Passport, it gets a bit like Passport abstracts a lot of stuff away, but anytime you have to go diving through there to figure something out, it gets a bit grim. It gets even worse when you have to start diving into like the League OAuth package, and then you can write the whole day off at that point.
Yeah, I need to look into OAuth as like not as the server side of it, but as like the consumer side of it. Because like I said, when we have to integrate with an OAuth endpoint, it's sort of painful. And I know there's solutions out there. It was like one of those things where it's like, oh, I can do this in like like an hour and a half or whatever. No big deal. I could just kind of like do this myself, and you do it, and then it freaks out. But yeah, anyway, I need to look at that League OAuth 2 stuff because I think there's probably a better way to do that than the way that I'm doing it, which is like some home rolled sort of deal. So anyway, hey, you want to talk about adversary in the middle attacks real quick?
Yeah, I saw you put that in there. Tell us about it.
Have you ever heard of this?
No.
Okay. There was a breach by a company called Stryker, maybe a month ago, and it was one of the largest cyber attacks like in recent history. They wiped 200,000 devices in like 79 countries in 4 hours. And so the way that worked is they stole credentials from an administrator and they went into Microsoft Intune, which is like a MDM sort of endpoint manager, and they just issued a wipe all command to every single enrolled device. Phones, computers, everything. Just wiped them all. And it wasn't malware or anything. It was designed to do that. They just had the credentials to do it. And they had no sort of like it's called MAA, multi-administrator approval, similar to like pull requests, right? How you can't merge a pull request without another person taking a look at it. They didn't have that turned on. And so we have that turned on everywhere now, multi-administrator approval. But the way that the leading theory as to how they stole the token is called adversary in the middle attack. So this is really interesting. I feel like up until this point, we've always touted MFA as like, well, it doesn't matter if somebody gets a link in an email and gets phished because they have MFA and they can't defeat their MFA. No big deal, right? Well, this can.
Turns out you
and
can.
so Yeah, this can. And so the way that it works is they send you to a link that is a fake link, but they act as a reverse proxy and they will send you to your real tenant's single sign on login page. And so it's proxied though, right? But so what it'll do is it'll ask, hey, what's your username? You put it in, they proxy it forward. What's your password? They proxy it forward. What's your 2FA? They proxy it through, or you get a notification on your phone and then you type it in. And they steal your token that you're getting back and then they forward it back through to you so that you never even know that anything happened, right? Everything looks completely legit. It looks totally fine, but they now have the token. And so the only way to defeat this is using strong MFA, like a hardware token or passkeys, which until recently I've been like, screw passkeys. I'm never using a passkey. They're so annoying. They're actually not that annoying, actually, if you have like 1Password. They're pretty convenient,
Oh
pretty
yeah,
dang
they're great in
convenient.
1Password.
Super nice, super nice. But that's the only way to kind of defeat these things is to use a passkey. Otherwise, 2FA, it just kind of goes right around it. No big deal. So, if you're, obviously you have to be compromised in the first place by clicking on a link that is not a correct link. But after that, everything looks completely legit. And so it's kind of scary because we're now having to say, like, okay, MFA alone is not sufficient, especially for our people who are at the top level of our organization as far as the technical side of things is concerned. And so we've had to sort of enforce passkeys everywhere, which has been a bit of a thing. But it feels like, man, these attacks are coming quicker and quicker, more and more frequently. It seems like every time we're talking about another one. I don't know if you knew Canonical, like Landscape,
Oh
Ubuntu,
yeah,
Landscape, Canonical.
Ubuntu.
Canonical. They've been
Yeah,
under a DDoS attack since
yeah,
like last Friday.
yeah. I thought it was very
Um,
nice of those attackers to say that like this is going to continue for 4 hours. Like,
yeah,
oh, okay. I
yeah,
guess in 4 hours we'll be okay. Sorry, guys.
yeah, right, right. And then they're like, oh no, just kidding. 4 days later, it's still kind of going on.
Mm.
But yeah, it's kind of crazy, man. It's just a wild west out there right now. It feels like. And then there's that CVE that came out, that copy run something something whatever. I don't know if you got that notification in Forge that was like,
Oh
hey,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
by the way,
Restart your
there's like
servers.
this CVE thing that you need to take a look at. Yeah. So man, it just feels like I feel like half of my time in the last month has been spent chasing down things that are like, oh, don't don't miss this thing. Make sure you're taking care of this. Make sure you don't miss out
Yeah.
on, this whatever. And so anyway, I don't know. It's interesting. I feel like maybe this will be the thing that'll get us to adopt passkeys by
Mm.
like, largely. And so anyway, it's been good to use passkeys and kind of get familiar with it. But now it's making me wonder too, like, okay, which of my apps should I implement passkeys in, and is that a thing I really need to do? And so I don't know. It'll be interesting. It's going to be a whole new requirement now, like on all these security things that we get from our clients. Like, you do 2FA, but do you do passkeys? And so that might be something we need to start looking into. I feel like Matt Stauffer did like a deep dive on passkeys not too long ago, didn't he?
Yeah, I remember seeing it around somewhere. I mean, it's because it's built into the Laravel starter kits now as well as an auth option. So
Nice.
must be part of Fortify.
Fortify?
Mm.
Yeah. So anyway, I got to look into that a little bit. Now, thankfully for us, like our authentication stuff is all built in through SSO with our tenant, with our Microsoft tenant client. So um, we don't really have to worry about that. We can just enable it in there and it's all set to go. But
Hmm.
for things that we do that are public facing, that'll be something we'll have to take a look at. So it's a crazy world out there, man. It is a crazy
Yeah.
world.
It's certainly,
Yep.
I mean, it's getting there more and more now, simply because, like, you would have to say that it's because of the availability and the prevalence of AI now that you
Agreed.
can just
Yeah, agreed.
send the AI off to do your bidding now. Where, before there was obviously people that were very skilled and, state backed organizations and whatever else that are in positions to go around hacking things. But now, you just set Claude off and off it goes and figures out, okay, I'm going to go and bust into this thing or that thing or whatever else. And you just let
Exactly.
it spin until it finds something. and it's just going to happen more and more often, and faster and faster, just because it's possible now. So
Yeah. Like, I don't know if you saw that, and people can use, like, their own local models and stuff. I sent a chat this morning that we have a couple local models, whatever, and the token throughput was 140 million tokens.
oh, this is on
On-
your
yeah,
GTX RTX thing.
yeah, DGX, yeah, and we've got like 4 of them now.
Mm.
So these things, we're creating a little farm over here. It's been really cool. And so we should have Andy on to talk about this. Maybe he'll talk about it in his podcast a little bit. But it's been really interesting to see some of the stuff that they're working with and working on. They're using the Gemma 4 model now, and
Mm-hmm.
it's been
Yeah.
pretty awesome. Yeah, it's been really really good. And so they've got that on all the DGXs, and they're sort of running a load balancer in front of them, and it's been really
Mm.
really interesting to watch and follow along with what he's doing. But yeah, we
Yeah.
should have him on sometime to talk about
I
all the
am.
cool stuff he's working on.
I did play around with the Gemma 4 model on my work machine, because it's like a 64 gig M4 Max, and
Mm-hmm.
it worked well enough. I don't like, obviously it's not as quick as the frontier models
Of
using
course,
Claude or
yeah.
GPT or whatever, on a consumer grade device, but like we're getting there, and we're getting there pretty quickly. So um just because I need to run shortly, but I saw this thing this morning from Kyle Daigle, who's the COO at GitHub. There's been a lot of downtime recently. They're struggling with keeping
Yeah.
GitHub up. They had like this weird merge queue bug the other day, where it just
Oh
like
boy.
went and deleted a whole bunch of commits from people's repositories and things like that. I think they said it was something like 2,800 commits across millions of users, which may or may not be accurate. But
My gosh.
I saw this tweet this morning come across my timeline from Kyle saying that, yep, platform activity is surging. There were 1 billion commits in 2025, and now it's 275 million per
Oh
week,
my
on pace
gosh.
for 14 billion this year if growth remains linear. And in brackets, spoiler, it won't. GitHub Actions
Yeah.
has grown from 500 million minutes a week in 2023 to 1 billion minutes a week in 2025,
Oh my
and
word.
now 2.1 billion minutes so far this week.
Oh
Uh,
my
you know,
gosh.
and it's Monday, right? So we're
Yeah.
pushing incredibly hard on more CPUs, scaling services, and strengthening GitHub's core features. And as a fine purveyor of handcrafted shit code for many years, I'm not going to weigh in on that. So where you think, 2 years ago it was just us humans
Yeah,
could only write so much code, could only
that's
test
right.
so much code, could only open so many PRs. Now, even though, like, you would think in our tech sphere, in our tech bubble, that everyone's using AI and it's the end of the world, and whatever else, it's roughly the same number of people that are now using 5-10 agents at once to open, to work on multiple features in parallel, to ship multiple PRs in parallel, to may or may not review them. But every time you fire a PR up there, and like for our CI, it's 8 processors or 5 shards, running at 4 minutes each, plus CI plus Stan and Pint and whatever else are running. We're talking 10 jobs per PR. If everyone's opening up 10 PRs per day, all of a sudden, you can see
Yeah.
how this gets out of control. And so,
Oh yeah.
sure, yes, of course, GitHub is struggling, and there's people out there that are like, GitHub was never built for
Like they're
agents.
like,
It's
we're
like, yeah,
leaving. Yeah.
of course it wasn't, because when GitHub was built 20 years ago, the notion of agentic development was not even the twinkle in anyone's eye.
Mm-hmm.
And so the fact that it's still up
Right.
89.8% of the time is ridiculous. And people talking about, who's building the next GitHub. I'm like, how do you solve this problem? Who has
Oh
got,
no, it's
like, we're
who has the
talking Microsoft here,
resources, the developers,
right?
the funding, who has all of
We're
that stuff in
talking
order to be able to build
Microsoft,
it. Yeah.
um, what do we market? What is the market cap? How big a company? They're a $3 trillion company.
Yeah.
right? Now, obviously, GitHub is probably only a tiny fraction of Microsoft's portfolio, but we're talking about a $3 trillion company. Um, what who's coming in? Who's bigger than Microsoft that's going to
Yeah. Who's
tackle this problem?
disrupting
Or
that?
and
Totally.
that's not to say that like more money is going to solve the problem. You know, it's going to be innovative thinking. It's going to be like looking at this in a different way. It's going to be building something differently to support this. But $3 trillion worth of resources. Who is going to solve the problem that agentic development and like the sheer volume and it's I say it's largely the same number of people, but you've obviously got the outliers, the people that the people that were around the peripheral, CEOs, CTOs, product people, marketers that are now building stuff that they couldn't build before. Okay, but we're still not talking a huge like we're not it's not 100% growth or 200% growth. It's still a small percentage on top of what was there before, and the volume is still growing so much more. So it's and the thing is compute. Everyone's fighting for the same compute resources. Anthropic wants all the GPUs and the RAM, and OpenAI wants it, and XAI wants it, and Microsoft wants stuff, and AWS wants stuff. We've got local providers here that cannot get hardware to put in their data centers. They're just out of capacity, and they can't. Normal growth, sure, they've reached capacity, but they cannot buy more hardware to put into their data centers now to bring on more customers because they just can't get access to the hardware. So even if you had the capital to solve the problem, you physically cannot solve the problem. We can't build data centers fast enough. We can't power them. We can't cool them. We can't, all this stuff. Um, it's just an interesting challenge that we've created it for ourselves. But it's not going to be solved quickly or easily or cheaply for sure.
Yeah. Okay. How much time do we have left, Michael?
I mean, we're at 33 minutes now, and I've got
Okay.
to go and look at some paint. So very exciting stuff.
Okay. We should talk about next time. We should talk about what is it called? Basically, it's processors that use light rather than electrons. Can't remember what they're called.
Quantum. We're talking quantum.
Nope,
What was the
not
question?
quantum. Not a question, more of a so it's
What
like
was
there are
what
these
did you say?
processors that use I think they're called like photovoltaics or something like that, like photonic processors, I think is what they're called.
Okay.
Photonic
Right.
processors. Have you heard of these?
No.
No. Okay. We should talk about it next time. The long
Okay.
and short, though, is I was thinking like quantum is going to be the thing that's going to help solve all the problems for like AI stuff. It's not. Quantum actually doesn't apply very well to this problem that we have, which is like matrix multiplication, right? Running vectors through these matrices multiplications and then getting outputs, right? That's all AI is. And obviously with the current set of processors we have, there's only so you can only flip bits so quickly, and they also generate heat because the electrons are colliding with actual atoms and generating heat. So you have to deal with that heat, and the speed is an issue. And so these photonic processors actually use light, and it's really cool because light, because of the way it works in physics, it actually does matrix multiplication natively, like using physics. It's not like a math operation like it is with flipping bits on and off. So like if you take a red wavelength and a blue wavelength and you combine them, they multiply basically to give you like a purple wavelength, right? So it's like physics, the way that it does the multiplication. And it's also insanely fast. Like it's faster than the speed at which we can flip bits. And so these things are coming on, which these photonic processors, which I mean will maybe even solve some of these problems of heat and power and speed. Right? How cool would it be within 5 years if all of this AI stuff and the NVIDIA hype is just like, you don't need it anymore? Like we've got these photonic processors that have basically solved 80% of the problems. And now we just can rip like crazy with the models. Like just go nuts. I tell you, man, like it doesn't seem far off that it could be that way. There's all these problems that are arising right now because of all the AI stuff, but it's like it's still such an early technology, it feels like.
Yeah.
And it's helping us to innovate so quickly. I could see having solutions to some of the problems that it's creating right now within the next short span of time. And then it's like, all these bottlenecks you're talking about, maybe they become not problems anymore. I don't know. It's pretty interesting
Yeah.
stuff. But we can
Well,
talk
I
about
mean,
that next time.
we're either going to have to overcome, or we're just going to have to. We've come too far now to give up on it. So there's going to have to be
Totally.
some way around it. Someone will figure
But
it out.
everybody's totally, they've got to, but everybody's operating at like a loss right now, right? I mean, like we're not paying Anthropic enough to actually run these models, I don't think. You know what I mean? Like,
No, nowhere
but
near.
it's a capture the market sort of game right now. So anyway, yeah, somebody's got to figure it out. You're right. And hopefully we do. I think we probably will.
Yeah.
But it's probably a good place to stop this one. 192. Is that right? Episode 192, folks. Find show notes for this at northmeetsouth.audio/192. Rate us up in your podcatcher of choice. 5 stars would be incredible. We'd really appreciate it. And hit us up with any questions on X at Michael Dorinda, Jacob Bennett, or North South Audio. All right, folks. Till next time. We'll see you.
Bye.